Picture this, you're scrolling through Instagram and your wellness influencer friend just posted a fondant in acai bowl topped with goji berries, hemp hearts, and something called activated charcoal powder. The caption reads, "Nourishing my temple with ancient superfoods." Meanwhile, your bank account is crying because you just spent 47 at Whole Foods on what amounts to a single meal's worth of quinoa, kombucha, and grass-fed something or other. You're probably thinking, how did our ancestors survive without our access to overpriced organic everything? Well, here's the kicker. They didn't just survive, they accidentally created the most celebrated diet in human history. And they did it while broke, desperate, and living in a world where a bad harvest meant actual starvation, not just having to eat regular bananas instead of organic ones. Welcome to ancient Greece, circa 500 BCE, where 90% of the population were farmers, labourers, or slaves living on what modern people would consider impossible budgets. We're talking about a world where a day's wages, if you were lucky enough to get paid, might buy you 12 loaves of bread, and meat was such a luxury that most people only tasted it during religious festivals when the gods got their share first, and the scraps trickled down to everyone else. These weren't people obsessing over macronutrient ratios or checking the glycemic index of their morning gruel. They were simply trying not to die, using whatever grew within walking distance of their mud brick homes. And yet somehow these desperate survival strategies accidentally created what we now call the Mediterranean diet. The same eating pattern that modern nutritionists worship, celebrities endorse, and that costs a small fortune to replicate authentically today. The irony is almost too perfect. While we're paying $8 for a single bottle of cold-pressed olive oil and calling it a healthy fat investment, ancient Greek peasants were scraping the dregs from olive presses and turning them into meals that would make a modern foodie weep with envy. They were eating fermented foods before we knew what gut health was, combining plant proteins before we understood amino acid profiles, and practicing intermittent fasting. Not because some biohacker told them to, but because that's what happened when the food ran out between harvests. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into the fascinating, gritty, and surprisingly sophisticated world of ancient Greek peasant cuisine. These 15 meals weren't just food. They were acts of culinary rebellion against poverty, hunger, and the very real possibility of starving to death. And the best part? Every single one of these desperation dishes would fit perfectly on the menu of a trendy farm-to-table restaurant today, probably with a 400% markup and a story about honouring traditional foodways. Let's start with the absolute foundation of Greek peasant survival, the meal that kept entire civilizations alive, barley gruel, or as they called it, alfita. If you think your morning oatmeal is basic, you haven't met alfita. This was barley, not the fancy hulled barley you find in the health food aisle, but rough, chewy, barely processed barley that had been ground by hand using stones that were probably older than your grandmother. The process of making alfita started before dawn, with women grinding barley between two stones, their arms aching from the repetitive motion that would continue for hours. The sound of grinding stones was the morning alarm clock of ancient Greece, a rhythmic scraping that echoed through every village. The resulting gruel was about as exciting as watching paint dry, but it was pure survival fuel. Barley was mixed with water, sometimes milk if a family was particularly fortunate, and cooked into a thick porridge that could stick to your ribs for hours. The texture was somewhere between modern oatmeal and concrete, and the flavour was, well, imagine if cardboard had a less exciting cousin. But here's where it gets interesting. Modern health enthusiasts pay premium prices for ancient grains, touting barley's high fibre content, its ability to regulate blood sugar, and its impressive protein profile. Ancient Greeks didn't know about beta-glucan or glycemic indexes. They just knew that a bowl of alfita in the morning meant they might have enough energy to work their fields without collapsing. The cultural significance of barley runs deeper than just nutrition. In Greek mythology, barley was one of Demeter's gifts to humanity, right alongside wheat. The goddess of harvest and agriculture supposedly taught humans how to cultivate grains, making barley not just food, but a divine blessing. Archaeological evidence from ancient Greek sites shows barley storage jars, or pithoi, that could hold hundreds of pounds of grain, the ancient equivalent of a doomsday prepper's pantry. What's particularly fascinating is how Romans viewed Greek barley consumption. Roman writers often mocked Greeks for eating what they considered horse food, preferring their own wheat-based diet. Little did they know that Greeks were accidentally following what modern nutritionists now recommend as optimal human nutrition. The joke was on Rome. Greeks were getting more fibre, better mineral absorption, and more stable blood sugar from their inferior grains. A single family might stretch a pot of alfita across multiple meals, adding whatever was available. A handful of wild herbs, a drizzle of olive oil if they were lucky, or just salt if they weren't. Children grew up on this stuff, their taste buds calibrated to find comfort in simplicity, and when times got really tough, alfita became even more watered down, stretching precious grain stores across longer periods of scarcity. The preparation ritual was almost meditative. Women would wake before sunrise, start the grinding process, tend the fire, and slowly cook the barley while managing a dozen other household tasks. It was multitasking born of necessity, not choice. The pot of alfita would simmer away while they prepared for the day's work, filling the small homes with the earthy aroma of cooked grain and wood smoke. Now, from the foundational gruel, let's move to something that would make modern foodies absolutely lose their minds. Olive paste on stale bread. The original bruschetta born from pure desperation. Imagine bread so bad it could double as a construction material. We're talking about bread that had been sitting around for days, maybe weeks during tough times, turning into something resembling edible stone. In a world without preservatives or airtight containers, bread went stale fast, and throwing it away was absolutely not an option. This wasn't the charming, day-old bread you might find at a bakery discount rack. This was bread that required serious intervention to become edible again. Enter olive paste, the miracle spread that could resurrect the dead, or at least dead bread. But this wasn't the artisanal tapenade you'd find at a trendy Mediterranean restaurant for $18 a jar. This was olive paste made from the dregs, the bits left over after the good olive oil had been extracted. After olives were pressed for their precious oil, the remaining pulp, skins, bits of flesh, sometimes even small pieces of pit, would be ground into a thick, dark paste. The process was labour-intensive and messy. Families would gather around large stone mortars, taking turns grinding the olive remnants with wooden pestles until they formed a spreadable paste. The result was intensely flavoured, almost overwhelmingly olivey, with a texture that was part smooth, part chunky, and entirely necessary for survival. To prepare this ancient predecessor to bruschetta, the rock-hard bread would be drizzled with a precious few drops of olive oil, if any was available, or just water to soften it slightly. Then the olive paste would be spread thick, transforming inedible bread into something approaching a meal. Sometimes wild herbs would be mixed in, adding flavour and nutrients. Oregano, thyme, or whatever was growing wild on the hillsides would be crushed and stirred into the paste. The cultural significance of olives in ancient Greece cannot be overstated. According to mythology, Athena gave the olive tree to Athens, beating out Poseidon's gift of a saltwater spring. The olive tree became sacred, and olive oil was literally liquid gold. It was used for cooking, lighting lamps, religious ceremonies, and even as currency. For peasants, every drop was precious, which makes the resourcefulness of turning olive waste into food even more impressive. Archaeological excavations have uncovered ancient olive presses throughout Greece, massive stone installations that required multiple people to operate. The first pressing produced the highest quality oil reserved for the wealthy or for trade. The second and third pressings produced progressively lower quality oil, and finally the leftover pulp would be processed into paste or used as fuel for fires. What's remarkable is how this desperation food accidentally created perfect nutrition. Modern nutritionists rave about the monounsaturated fats in olives, their antioxidant properties, and their role in heart health. Ancient Greeks were getting all of these benefits while simply trying to make stale bread edible. The combination of carbohydrates from bread and healthy fats from olives provided sustained energy for long days of physical labour. The social aspect of this meal was equally important. Families would gather around the single loaf of bread, each person getting their portion with olive paste. It was communal eating born of necessity, where every crumb mattered and sharing was essential for survival. Children learned early that food was precious, that nothing could be wasted, and that even the humblest ingredients could sustain life. From olive paste, we moved to another protein powerhouse that kept Greek peasants alive through harsh winters. Lentil soup, or fake, the original plant-based protein that predates every modern superfood trend by millennia. Lentils were the unsung heroes of ancient Greek nutrition. Small but mighty legumes that could grow in poor soil and store for months without spoiling. While wealthy Greeks might have turned their noses up at lentil soup, considering it peasant food, the peasants were accidentally consuming one of the most nutritionally complete foods available. These tiny legumes packed protein, fibre, iron and folate into every spoonful, nutrients that were essential for people doing backbreaking physical labour from sunrise to sunset. The preparation of lentil soup was an all-day affair that required careful planning and precious fuel. Firewood wasn't unlimited, so families had to make every piece of wood count. The process started with sorting through dried lentils by hand, removing stones, broken pieces, and any other debris that might have made its way into the storage containers. This wasn't optional. Biting down on a stone could crack a tooth, and dental care in ancient Greece was essentially non-existent. Once cleaned, the lentils would be added to a large clay pot with water, and the slow cooking process would begin. The pot would simmer over a carefully maintained fire for hours, with family members taking turns stirring stirring and adding water as needed. The key was maintaining just enough heat to cook the lentils without burning them or wasting precious fuel. As the lentils cooked, they would release their starch, creating a thick, hearty soup that could feed a family for days. The base recipe was simple: lentils, water, salt if available, but the real magic happened with whatever additions the family could forage or afford. Wild onions gathered from hillsides would add flavour and nutrients. Herbs like oregano, thyme, or bay leaves would contribute not just taste, but also medicinal properties that ancient Greeks understood intuitively. If a family was particularly fortunate, up there, they might add a small amount of olive oil to the soup, creating a richer, more satisfying meal. Sometimes a piece of preserved meat or a bone with some marrow would be added, transforming the simple lentil soup into a more substantial stew. But most of the time, it was just lentils, water, and whatever wild plants could be gathered. The cultural significance of lentils in ancient Greece is fascinating. The playwright Aristophanes frequently referenced lentil soup in his comedies, using it as a symbol of poverty and humble living. Characters who ate lentils were clearly marked as lower class, but the joke was on the wealthy. Lentil eaters were getting superior nutrition, while the rich suffered from diets heavy in meat and refined foods. Archaeological evidence shows that lentils were cultivated throughout the Greek world, with storage facilities found in homes across all social classes. Even wealthy households kept lentils as backup food, understanding their value as a reliable protein source. The fact that lentils could be stored for years without spoiling made them essential for surviving bad harvests or economic hardship. The communal aspect of lentil soup preparation was crucial for family bonding and survival. The long cooking process meant that someone always had to tend the fire, creating opportunities for storytelling, teaching children about food preparation, and maintaining the social fabric of the household. Grandmothers would pass down recipes and techniques, ensuring that knowledge about food preparation survived through generations. Modern nutritionists would be amazed at the protein combining that ancient Greeks achieved instinctively. Lentils, while high in protein, don't contain all essential amino acids, but when combined with grains like barley, which was often eaten at the same meal or throughout the same day, the combination created a complete protein profile equivalent to meat. Ancient Greeks didn't understand amino acid profiles, but they understood that lentils and grains together kept them stronger and healthier. The seasonal nature of lentil soup consumption also reveals sophisticated understanding of nutrition and food security. Lentils were typically harvested in late summer and would be consumed heavily during winter months when fresh foods were scarce. The high iron content was particularly important during winter, helping to prevent anemia when green vegetables weren't available. From the hearty comfort of lentil soup, we venture into the wild world of foraged greens, or horta, where ancient Greek women and children became expert botanists out of sheer necessity. Foraging wasn't a trendy weekend activity or an Instagram-worthy adventure, it was a matter of life and death. Every spring, as soon as the first wild greens began to emerge from the rocky Greek soil, families would spread out across hillsides, valleys, and abandoned fields, searching for edible plants that could supplement their meagre diets. This wasn't casual gathering, it was systematic, scientific foraging that required encyclopedic knowledge of plant identification, seasonal timing, and preparation methods. The women of ancient Greece were walking botanical databases. They could distinguish between dozens of similar-looking plants, knowing which ones were nutritious, which ones were medicinal, and which ones would kill you. This knowledge was passed down through generations of mothers teaching daughters, creating an oral tradition of plant wisdom that was more comprehensive than many modern field guides. Common foraged greens included dandelions, which grew everywhere and were available early in the season. The entire plant was edible, leaves for salads and cooking, roots for medicine, and flowers for wine. Purslane, now recognized as a superfood for its omega-3 content, was considered a weed by some but treasure by those who knew its value. Amaranth leaves provided protein and minerals, while wild spinach added iron and vitamins to the diet. The foraging process was labor-intensive and required perfect timing. Many wild greens were only tender and palatable for a few weeks each year. Miss the window and the plants would become tough, bitter, or even toxic. Women would wake before dawn during peak foraging season, carrying baskets and simple tools to harvest wild greens before the heat of the day made the work unbearable. Once gathered, the greens required careful preparation. Many wild plants contain natural compounds that make them bitter or difficult to digest, so they needed to be blanched, boiled, or prepared in specific ways to make them palatable and safe. The knowledge of how to properly prepare each type of green was crucial. Some needed to be boiled multiple times to remove toxins, while others were best eaten raw when young. The most common preparation was a simple stew, made by boiling the mixed greens with whatever other ingredients were available. Onions, if they could be found or afforded, would be added for flavour. A precious drizzle of olive oil would transform the bitter greens into something approaching delicious. Sometimes the greens would be mixed with grains or legumes to create a more substantial meal. What's fascinating is how this foraging tradition accidentally created incredibly diverse, nutrient-dense meals. Modern nutritionists recommend eating a variety of colourful vegetables to ensure adequate vitamin and mineral intake. Ancient Greek foragers were doing exactly this, consuming dozens of different plant species throughout the year, each contributing unique nutritional compounds. The seasonal nature of foraging also created natural dietary variation. Spring greens were often bitter and cleansing, helping to detoxify bodies after winter diets, heavy in stored grains and preserved foods. Summer foraging focused on different plants that provided cooling properties during hot weather. Fall gathering concentrated on seeds, nuts, and roots that could be stored for winter consumption. Archaeological evidence supports the importance of foraging in ancient Greek diets. Excavations of ancient trash pits reveal seeds and plant remains from dozens of wild species, indicating that foraging was a regular part of life across all social classes. Even wealthy households supplemented their diets with foraged foods, though they likely had servants doing the actual gathering. The social aspects of foraging were equally important. Women and children would often forage together, creating opportunities for education and bonding. Young girls learned to identify plants, understand seasonal patterns, and develop the patience and observation skills necessary for successful foraging. This knowledge made them valuable contributors to family survival and gave them a form of independence and expertise that was rare in ancient patriarchal societies. Modern foraging enthusiasts pay hundreds of dollars for guided tours and specialized books to learn what ancient Greek children absorbed naturally through daily experience. The depth of botanical knowledge required for survival foraging was extraordinary, understanding not just what was edible, but when to harvest, how to prepare, and how to preserve wild foods for later use. The connection between foraging and health was also well understood. Many foraged greens were valued not just for nutrition, but for their medicinal properties. Dandelion for liver health, purslane for wounds, wild mint for digestion. Ancient Greeks were practicing food as medicine long before it became a trendy concept. From the hillside foraging adventures, we dive into the pungent world of coastal survival food. Fish sauce and bread soup, an umami bomb that would make modern ramen enthusiasts weep with joy. If you think modern fish sauce is intense, you haven't experienced the ancient Greek version. This wasn't the refined, carefully aged fish sauce you might find in an upscale Asian grocery store. This was survival fermentation at its most basic. Fish scraps, salt and thyme, combining to create liquid flavour that could transform the blandest ingredients into something approaching a meal. The process started with fish that were too small, too damaged, or too cheap to eat fresh. Sardines, anchovies and other small fish were layered with coarse sea salt in large clay jars and left to ferment in the sun for weeks or months. The salt drew out moisture while beneficial bacteria broke down the fish proteins, creating a dark, intensely flavoured liquid that was pure concentrated umami. For coastal peasants, this fish sauce was liquid gold. A few drops could transform a bowl of stale bread and water into something that actually had flavour. The preparation was simple but required careful timing and technique. Stale bread would be broken into chunks and placed in a bowl. Hot water would be poured over the bread to soften it, and then the precious fish sauce would be added, drop by drop, until the mixture had enough flavour to be palatable. The resulting soup was about 90% psychological satisfaction and 10% actual nutrition, but sometimes that psychological component was the difference between giving up and surviving another day. The intense umami flavour triggered the same satisfaction responses that modern people get from rich, meaty broths, even though the actual protein content was minimal. What made this survival food particularly ingenious was how it maximised the nutritional value of fish scraps that would otherwise be discarded. The fermentation process broke down fish proteins into amino acids that were easily absorbed by the body. The sauce was also rich in B vitamins, particularly B12, which was crucial for people eating primarily plant-based diets. The cultural significance of fish sauce in ancient Greece extended beyond mere survival food. The Greeks developed a sophisticated fermentation industry, producing different grades of fish sauce for different social classes. The highest quality sauce, made from the best fish and aged for years, was traded throughout the Mediterranean and commanded premium prices, but even the lowest grade sauce, made from scraps and aged for just a few weeks, was valuable enough to be worth the time and effort required for production. Archaeological excavations have uncovered ancient fish sauce production facilities throughout the Greek islands and coastal areas. These weren't small-scale household operations, they were industrial-level fermentation facilities that produced thousands of gallons of fish sauce for local consumption and trade. The scale of production indicates just how important fermented fish products were to the ancient Greek economy and diet. The knowledge required to successfully ferment fish sauce was considerable. The salt-to-fish ratio had to be precise to prevent spoilage while allowing beneficial fermentation. The timing had to be perfect. Too short and the sauce would be weak. Too long and it might become too concentrated or develop off flavours. Temperature and humidity had to be managed carefully, and the fermentation vessels had to be maintained properly to prevent contamination. For families living near the coast, fish sauce production was often a cooperative effort. Multiple households would pool their fish scraps and share the work of processing and aging the sauce. This cooperation made sense economically. It was more efficient to produce larger batches, and it ensured that everyone had access to this crucial flavouring agent, even during times when fish were scarce. The seasonal nature of fish sauce production also reveals sophisticated understanding of food preservation and planning. Fish were most abundant during certain seasons, and this was when families would work intensively to produce enough sauce to last through leaner times. The sauce itself could be stored for years without spoiling, making it an ideal way to preserve the nutritional and flavour value of seasonal abundance. Modern food scientists are amazed by the sophistication of ancient fermentation techniques. The Greeks were manipulating bacterial cultures, managing pH levels, and controlling fermentation environments with remarkable precision, all without understanding the underlying microbiology. They were guided by generations of accumulated knowledge and careful observation of what worked and what didn't. The health benefits of fermented fish sauce were significant, though not understood scientifically at the time. The fermentation process created beneficial probiotics that supported digestive health. The high sodium content, while potentially problematic in modern diets, was actually beneficial for people doing heavy physical labour in hot climates and losing salt through sweat. From the coastal umami adventures, we move inland to explore another protein-packed survival food, chickpea flour pancakes, the ancient Greek version of gluten-free comfort food that modern health enthusiasts pay premium prices to replicate. Chickpeas were the Swiss Army knife of ancient Greek legumes, versatile, nutritious, and capable of being transformed into dozens of different foods depending on the preparation method and available ingredients. When ground into flour, chickpeas became the foundation for pancakes, fritters, thick porridge, or even a kind of primitive bread substitute. This wasn't specialty health food, it was survival cuisine that happened to be accidentally perfect for modern dietary restrictions. The process of making chickpea flour was labour-intensive and required community cooperation. Dried chickpeas had to be ground using stone querns, the same grinding stones used for barley and wheat. The grinding process was exhausting work, typically done by women who would take turns at the grinding stones, their arms and backs aching from the repetitive motion. The resulting flour was coarser than modern machine-ground flour, with a nutty flavour and slightly gritty texture that actually added to its nutritional value. Chickpea pancakes was an art form born of necessity. The flour would be mixed with water to create a batter, and then the real creativity began. Families would add whatever was available: wild herbs for flavour, a precious drop of olive oil for richness, salt if they had it, or sometimes just hope and determination. The batter consistency was crucial. Too thick and the pancakes would be dense and heavy. Too thin and they would fall apart during cooking. Cooking the pancakes required careful fire management. Most families had only one cooking fire, and fuel was precious, so timing was everything. The pancakes would be cooked on flat stones or crude metal pans, requiring constant attention to prevent burning. The smell of cooking chickpea pancakes would fill the small homes with a nutty, earthy aroma that meant the difference between hunger and satisfaction. What makes chickpea flour particularly remarkable is its nutritional profile. Modern nutritionists rave about chickpea flour's high protein content, its complete amino acid profile, and its ability to provide sustained energy. Ancient Greeks didn't understand protein chemistry, but they understood that chickpea pancakes kept them feeling full and energized longer than grain-based foods alone. The versatility of chickpea preparation was crucial for preventing food boredom, which was a real psychological challenge for people eating limited diets. The same basic chickpea flour could be prepared as thin, crepe-like pancakes when water was plentiful, or as thick, substantial fritters when liquid was scarce. Adding different wild herbs or seasonal vegetables could create the illusion of variety even when the base ingredient remained the same. Archaeological evidence shows that chickpeas were cultivated through a throughout the ancient Greek world, with storage facilities found in homes across all social classes. The fact that chickpeas could be stored for years without spoiling made them essential for food security. Unlike fresh vegetables or even grains, which might be attacked by insects or rodents, properly dried chickpeas could remain edible almost indefinitely. The communal aspects of chickpea preparation were significant for social bonding and knowledge transfer. The grinding process often involved multiple women working together, creating creating opportunities for conversation, gossip, and the sharing of cooking techniques. Young girls would learn by watching and gradually taking on more responsibility, ensuring that knowledge about food preparation was passed down through generations. The seasonal nature of chickpea consumption also reveals sophisticated understanding of nutrition and food planning. Chickpeas were typically harvested in late summer and would be consumed most heavily during winter months when other protein sources were scarce. The high protein and calorie content was particularly important during cold weather, when bodies needed extra fuel to maintain warmth. Modern health food stores sell chickpea flour for premium prices, marketing it as a gluten-free, high-protein alternative to wheat flour. Ancient Greeks were getting all of these benefits while simply trying to survive on whatever grew in their harsh, rocky soil. The irony is that desperate peasants were eating more nutritiously than many modern people with access to global food markets. The preparation techniques developed by ancient Greeks for chickpea flour were remarkably sophisticated. They understood how to balance liquid ratios for different textures, how to incorporate other ingredients for flavor and nutrition, and how to cook the resulting batters for optimal taste and digestibility. This knowledge came from generations of experimentation and refinement, guided by the harsh teacher of necessity. From the protein-packed chickpea pancakes, we transitioned to something that would make modern wellness influencers absolutely ecstatic. Honey water and stale bread, the original energy drink that predates every sports beverage by thousands of years. Honey was liquid gold in ancient Greece, literally more valuable than many precious metals and infinitely more useful for survival. When families had access to honey, whether through beekeeping, trade, or the occasional lucky discovery of a wild hive, it became the foundation for one of the most effective survival foods imaginable. Mixed with water, honey created an instant energy drink that could revive exhausted workers and provide quick fuel for demanding physical labor. The preparation was deceptively simple but required careful rationing. A small amount of precious honey would be dissolved in water, creating a sweet liquid that could soften even the hardest stale bread. This wasn't the refined honey you find in modern grocery stores, squeezed from plastic bears. This was raw, unfiltered honey that contained pollen, propolis, and all the natural compounds that made it both food and medicine. The bread soaking process was almost ritualistic. Chunks of bread that had become too hard to chew would be placed in bowls and covered with the honey water mixture. The liquid would slowly penetrate the dense bread, softening it, infusing it with sweetness. The result was a carbohydrate-rich meal that provided both quick energy from the honey and sustained energy from the bread. What made this combination particularly effective was the complementary nature of the ingredients. Honey provided simple sugars that could be absorbed quickly by the body, giving almost instant energy. The bread provided complex carbohydrates that released energy more slowly, preventing the energy crash that might follow a purely sugar-based meal. Together, they created a sustained energy release that was perfect for people doing physical labor all day. The cultural significance of honey in ancient Greece extended far beyond nutrition. Honey was associated with the gods, used in religious ceremonies, and believed to have magical properties. According to mythology, the infant Zeus was fed honey by nymphs, and honey was considered the food of immortality. For peasants, having access to honey was like having a direct connection to divine blessing. Beekeeping in ancient Greece was a sophisticated practice that required considerable knowledge and skill. Beekeepers understood seasonal patterns, hive management, and honey harvesting techniques that maximized production while keeping the bees healthy. The best honey came from bees that fed on specific flowers. Thyme honey from the mountains was particularly prized for its flavor and supposed medicinal properties. Archaeological excavations have uncovered ancient beehives, honey storage jars, and beekeeping tools throughout Greece. These findings indicate that honey production was a significant part of the ancient economy, with some regions specializing in honey production for trade. The fact that honey could be stored indefinitely without spoiling made it valuable not just as food, but as a trade commodity and store of wealth. The medicinal uses of honey were well understood by ancient Greeks, who used it to treat wounds, sore throats, and digestive problems. Modern science has confirmed many of these traditional uses, showing that honey has antibacterial, antifungal, and anti-inflammatory properties. For ancient families, honey wasn't just food, it was their medicine cabinet, first aid kit, and energy supplement all rolled into one. The seasonal nature of honey availability created interesting patterns in ancient Greek diets. Honey was typically harvested in late summer and early fall, when flowers were most abundant and bees had produced their maximum stores. This timing meant that honey water and bread meals were most common during harvest season and early winter, when people needed extra energy for intensive agricultural work. For children, honey water was particularly important. The quick energy provided by honey was crucial for growing bodies, and the sweetness made even the stalest bread palatable to young palates. Parents would carefully ration honey to ensure that children got adequate nutrition, often sacrificing their own portions to make sure the next generation had enough energy to survive survive and thrive. The preparation of honey water required understanding of ratios and timing. Too much honey and the mixture became too sweet and expensive. Too little, and it wouldn't provide adequate energy or flavour. The water had to be clean, which wasn't always guaranteed in ancient times, and the honey had to be free from contamination. Families developed techniques for testing honey quality and mixing ratios that maximise both nutrition and economy. Modern sports drinks try to replicate the energy-providing properties of honey water, using complex formulations of sugars, electrolytes, and artificial flavours. Ancient Greeks achieved the same results with two simple ingredients, creating a natural energy drink that was more effective and certainly more delicious than anything available in modern convenience stores. From the sweet energy of honey water, we venture into the realm of zero-waste ingenuity. Cheeseway soup, the original farm-to-table sustainability practice that would make modern environmentalists weep with admiration. In a world where every calorie mattered and nothing could be wasted, the liquid left over from cheesemaking became the foundation for surprisingly nutritious soups. This wasn't a choice, it was necessity. When families went through the laborious process of making cheese from precious milk, throwing away the whey would have been like burning money. Instead, they transformed this byproduct into meals that provided protein, vitamins, and minerals that were crucial for survival. The cheese-making process itself was a community affair, often involving multiple families who would pool their milk to make the process more efficient. Milk from goats, sheep, or the occasional cow would be heated and curdled using rennet or acidic substances like vinegar. The curds would be separated and pressed into cheese, leaving behind a cloudy, protein-rich liquid that most modern people would pour down the drain without a second thought. But ancient Greek peasants saw liquid gold where we see waste. The whey contained dissolved proteins, lactose, vitamins, and minerals that had been extracted from the original milk. Rather than discarding this nutritional treasure, they would use it as the base for soups, stews, and even beverages. The whey could be consumed fresh, fermented into a mildly alcoholic drink, or used as cooking liquid for grains and vegetables. The preparation of whey soup required creativity and whatever other ingredients were available. Wild herbs gathered from hillsides would be added for flavour and nutrition. Barley or other grains might be cooked in the whey, creating a protein-rich porridge that was more nutritious than either ingredient alone. Sometimes vegetables would be added, creating a complete meal from what was essentially a waste product. What makes whey particularly remarkable from a nutritional standpoint is its protein quality. Whey contains all essential amino acids in proportions that are nearly perfect for human nutrition. Modern bodybuilders pay premium prices for whey protein supplements, while ancient Greeks were getting the same nutritional benefits from what they considered a byproduct of cheese production. The seasonal nature of whey availability was tied to the patterns of animal husbandry and milk production. Spring and early summer were peak times for milk production, when animals had access to fresh grass and were producing the most milk. This was when families would engage in intensive cheese making, generating the most whey for soup preparation. The timing was perfect. Whey soups provided extra nutrition during the busy agricultural season when people needed maximum energy. Archaeological evidence supports the importance of dairy processing in ancient Greek households. Excavations have uncovered cheese-making equipment, storage vessels for whey, and cooking pots that show evidence of whey-based cooking. The sophistication of these tools indicates that dairy processing wasn't a casual activity, but a crucial part of household food production. The communal aspects of cheese-making and whey utilization were significant for social bonding and knowledge transfer. Multiple families would often work together during cheese-making sessions, sharing labor, equipment, and expertise. Children would learn by watching and gradually taking on more responsibility, ensuring that knowledge about dairy processing and whey utilization was passed down through generations. The fermentation of whey into alcoholic beverages was another example of ancient Greek resourcefulness. The natural sugars in whey could be fermented by wild yeasts, creating a mildly alcoholic drink that was safer than water and provided additional calories and nutrients. This wasn't recreational drinking, it was nutritional fermentation that made the most of every available resource. Modern zero-waste cooking movements are trying to rediscover techniques that ancient Greeks used out of necessity. Contemporary chefs pay premium prices for whey and other waste products, using them to create innovative dishes that highlight sustainability and resourcefulness. Ancient Greek peasants were practicing advanced sustainability not from environmental consciousness, but from the simple reality that waste meant starvation. The medicinal properties of whey were also recognized by ancient Greeks, who used it to treat digestive problems and as a general health tonic. Modern research has confirmed many of these traditional uses, showing that whey contains compounds that support immune function, muscle recovery, and digestive health. Ancient families were getting pharmaceutical-grade nutrition from what they considered kitchen scraps. From the dairy-based ingenuity of whey soup, we venture into truly desperate territory. Acorn flour bread, the ultimate survival carbohydrate that sustained communities communities when grain harvests failed and starvation loomed. Acorns were the insurance policy of ancient Greek nutrition, the food that stood between communities and death during the worst famines. But unlike the other foods we've discussed, acorns required extensive processing to become edible. Fresh acorns are incredibly bitter and contain tannins that can be toxic in large quantities. Transforming them into edible flour was a labour-intensive process that required knowledge, patience, and considerable time investment. The acorn processing technique was passed down through generations of women who understood that this knowledge might someday mean the difference between life and death for their families. The process started with gathering acorns in fall when they were at their peak ripeness and before they could be consumed by wildlife. Families would spread out through oak forests, competing with squirrels and wild boars for this crucial resource. Once gathered, the acorns had to be shelled, which was back-breaking work done with stones and simple tools. The nut meats would then be ground into coarse flour using the same stone querns used for grain. But this was just the beginning. The real work was removing the bitter tannins that made raw acorn flour inedible. The detannification process involved repeated washing and boiling, sometimes lasting for days. The acorn flour would be placed in baskets and submerged in running streams, allowing the water to leach out the bitter compounds. Alternatively, the flour would be boiled in multiple changes of water until the liquid ran clear instead of brown. This process required constant attention and consumed precious fuel, but it was essential for making the acorns safe and palatable. The resulting flour was still coarser and denser than grain flour, but it could be made into a kind of bread that provided crucial carbohydrates during emergency situations. The bread was heavy, dark, and had an earthy flavour that modern palates might find challenging, but for people facing starvation, it was literally life-saving nutrition. What makes acorn flour particularly interesting from a nutritional standpoint is its mineral content. Acorns are rich in potassium, magnesium, and other minerals that were often lacking in grain-based diets. The processing required to make acorns edible was so labour-intensive that they were typically only used during emergencies, but when they were needed, they provided nutrition that could sustain entire communities. The cultural significance of acorns in ancient Greek society was complex. While they were recognised as emergency food, there was also some stigma attached to eating acorns, as they were associated with primitive times and desperate circumstances. Greek literature sometimes referenced acorn eating as a sign of extreme poverty or regression to a more primitive state of civilization. Archaeological evidence shows that acorn processing was practiced throughout the Mediterranean region, with specialized tools found at sites across ancient Greece. The presence of these tools indicates that acorn processing wasn't just an occasional emergency measure, but a regular part of food security planning. Communities that lived near oak forests had a significant survival advantage during times of crop failure. The seasonal timing of acorn gathering was crucial for maximizing nutritional value and storage potential. Acorns had to be gathered at exactly the right time. Too early and they wouldn't have developed full nutritional content. Too late and they would have begun to spoil or been consumed by wildlife. This timing required careful observation of natural cycles and coordination within communities to ensure adequate gathering. The knowledge required for successful acorn processing was encyclopedic. Different species of oak trees produced acorns with different tannin levels, requiring different processing techniques. Some acorns could be processed relatively quickly, while others required days of treatment. Understanding these differences was crucial for efficient use of time and resources. Modern foraging enthusiasts and survival experts are rediscovering acorn processing techniques, often struggling to replicate the efficiency that ancient peoples achieved through generations of practice. The process requires not just knowledge, but also considerable physical strength and endurance, qualities that ancient people developed through daily physical labour. The storage of processed acorn flour was another challenge that required specialised knowledge. The flour had to be kept dry and protected from insects and rodents, often in sealed containers or elevated storage areas. Properly stored acorn flour could last for months, providing a reliable backup food source during extended periods of scarcity. From the labour-intensive world of acorn processing, we move to something that would fit perfectly on a modern restaurant menu: grape leaf wraps with grain, the original meal prep solution that combined portability, nutrition, and preservation in one ingenious package. Grape leaves were the ancient equivalent of aluminum foil, providing a natural wrapper that could preserve and flavour food while making it portable for workers heading to distant fields. This wasn't just convenience food, it was sophisticated food technology that maximised nutrition while minimising waste and spoilage. The preparation required timing, skill, and access to grapevines, but the results were meals that could sustain workers through long days of physical labour. The process started with selecting the right grape leaves, which required considerable knowledge about timing and quality. Young, tender leaves were preferred for their flexibility and mild flavour, but they were only available for a short window in spring and early summer. Older leaves could be used, but required different preparation techniques to make them pliable enough for wrapping. Once the leaves were gathered, they needed to be blanched briefly in boiling water to make them flexible and to remove any bitterness. This step also helped preserve the leaves if they weren't going to be used immediately. The blanching process required careful timing. Too short and the leaves would tear during wrapping, too long and they would become mushy and lose their structural integrity. The filling was where creativity and resourcefulness came into play. The base was usually whatever grain was available: barley, wheat, or sometimes a mixture of grains and legumes. The grain would be cooked until tender but still firm, then seasoned with whatever herbs and spices the family could access. Wild mint, oregano, and thyme were common additions that provided both flavour and medicinal benefits. If the family was particularly fortunate, small amounts of olive oil would be added to the grain mixture, providing healthy fats and improving the flavour significantly. Sometimes chopped wild onions or garlic would be included, adding both taste and nutritional value. In rare cases, small pieces of preserved meat or cheese might be added, transforming the wraps into more substantial meals. The wrapping technique was an art form that required practice and skill. The filling would be placed in the centre of a grape leaf, and the leaf would be carefully rolled, tucking in the sides to create a neat package that wouldn't unroll during transport or storage. The wrapped parcels would then be arranged in cooking pots and steamed or braised until the grain was fully cooked and the flavours had melded together. What made grape leaf wraps particularly brilliant was their portability and preservation properties. The natural acids in grape leaves helped preserve the filling, while the tight wrapping prevented spoilage and contamination. Workers could carry these wraps to distant fields, and that they would remain fresh and safe to eat for days without refrigeration. The nutritional value of grape leaf wraps was considerable. The grain provided carbohydrates and protein, while the grape leaves contributed vitamins and minerals. The herbs and other additions provided additional nutrients and medicinal compounds. The combination created a complete meal that could sustain workers through demanding physical labour. Archaeological evidence shows that grape cultivation was widespread throughout ancient Greece, with vine-growing techniques that maximised both grape production and leaf harvesting. The dual use of grapevines, for fruit and for leaves, demonstrates the sophisticated resource management that characterised ancient Greek agriculture. The seasonal nature of grape leaf wrapping created interesting patterns in ancient Greek meal planning. The best leaves were available in spring and early summer, which coincided with the busy agricultural season when portable meals were most needed. Families would often prepare large batches of grape leaf wraps when leaves were at their peak, creating a supply of portable meals for the demanding work season. The communal aspects of grape leaf wrap preparation were significant for family bonding and knowledge transfer. The wrapping process was often done by multiple family members working together, creating opportunities for conversation and skill sharing. Children would learn by watching and gradually taking on more responsibility, ensuring that knowledge about food preparation and preservation was passed down through generations. Modern Greek cuisine still features dolmades, the descendants of these ancient survival foods, but they're now served as appetizers or side dishes rather than as complete meals. The evolution from necessity food to delicacy illustrates how survival techniques can become cultural traditions when the original need disappears. The preservation properties of grape leaf wraps were particularly important for food security. In a world without refrigeration, finding ways to keep food fresh and safe was crucial for survival. The natural antimicrobial properties of grape leaves combined with the airtight wrapping technique created an effective preservation system that could extend the life of cooked food significantly. From the sophisticated wrapping techniques of grape leaves, we descend into the humble world of root vegetables. Turnip and onion stew, the ultimate peasant comfort food that sustained families through the harshest winters when nothing else would grow. Turnips were the vegetables of last resort, the crops that would grow in soil too poor for anything else and survive frosts that would kill more delicate plants. In the social hierarchy of ancient Greek vegetables, turnips occupied the bottom rung. They were associated with poverty, desperation, and hard times. But for the families who depended on them, turnips were lifesavers that provided crucial nutrition when more prestigious foods were unavailable or unaffordable. The cultivation of turnips required minimal resources and could be done on marginal land that wasn't suitable for grain production. Turnip seeds were cheap and could be planted in late summer for winter harvest, providing fresh food during the months when most other vegetables were unavailable. The plant plants were hardy, requiring little care beyond basic weeding and occasional watering. Wild onions were often foraged to accompany the turnips, adding flavour and nutrition to what would otherwise be a bland and unappetizing meal. These weren't the large sweet onions available in modern grocery stores, but small, pungent, wild varieties that packed intense flavour and considerable nutritional value into tiny bulbs. Finding and harvesting wild onions required knowledge of seasonal patterns and the ability to identify the plants correctly. The preparation of turnip and onion stew was straightforward, but required careful management of precious resources. The turnips would be cleaned and chopped into chunks, while the wild onions would be prepared whole or roughly chopped depending on their size. The vegetables would be added to a pot with water and cooked slowly over a carefully maintained fire. The cooking process was lengthy, as turnips required considerable time to become tender and palatable. The slow cooking also helped to mellow the sometimes harsh flavours of both turnips and wild onions, creating a more pleasant eating experience. If olive oil was available, a small amount would be added to improve both flavour and nutrition. What made turnip and onion stew particularly valuable was its ability to provide nutrition during the winter months, when fresh foods were scarce. Turnips could be stored in cool, dry places for months without spoiling, providing a reliable source of carbohydrates and vitamins throughout the winter. The vitamin C content was particularly important for preventing scurvy and maintaining immune function during cold weather. The cultural stigma attached to turnip consumption reveals interesting aspects of ancient Greek social attitudes toward food and class. Wealthy Greeks looked down on turnip eaters, considering them to be living in poverty or lacking in social status. This attitude was reflected in literature and comedy, where turnip consumption was often used as a symbol of low social standing. Archaeological evidence shows that turnips were cultivated throughout the Greek world, with storage facilities found in homes across different social classes. Even wealthy households kept turnips as backup food, understanding their value as reliable nutrition during emergencies or economic hardship. The fact that turnips could be grown quickly and stored easily made them essential for food security. The seasonal timing of turnip cultivation and consumption was crucial for maximising their nutritional value and storage potential. Turnips planted in late summer would be ready for harvest in late fall, just as other fresh foods were becoming scarce. The timing meant that families could have fresh vegetables available during the early winter months when they were most needed. Preparation techniques for turnip and onion stew were refined through generations of necessity. Families learned how to balance cooking times to ensure that both vegetables were properly cooked, how to season the stew with available herbs and spices, and how to stretch the ingredients to feed the maximum number of people. Modern nutritionists would be impressed by the health benefits of turnip and onion stew. Turnips are rich in vitamin C, fibre and minerals, while onions provide antioxidants and compounds that support immune function. The combination created a nutritious meal that supported health during challenging winter months. The storage and preservation of turnips required specialised knowledge and techniques. Turnips had to be harvested at the right time, stored in appropriate conditions, and checked regularly for signs of spoilage. Families developed methods for extending turnip storage life, including techniques for preventing rot and protecting the vegetables from freezing. From the humble turnips, we moved to something that would make modern health food enthusiasts pay premium prices. Dried fig paste, nature's candy that provided concentrated energy and essential nutrients during times of scarcity. Figs were one of the few sweet foods available to ancient Greek peasants, and when dried and processed into paste, they became a concentrated source of energy that could sustain families through difficult periods. This wasn't recreational snacking, it was strategic nutrition that maximised the caloric value of seasonal abundance while creating food that could be stored for months without spoiling. The fig drying process required perfect timing and favourable weather conditions. Fresh figs had to be harvested at peak ripeness, when their sugar content was highest but before they became overripe and began to ferment. The drying process typically took place in late summer and early fall, when the Mediterranean climate provided the hot, dry conditions necessary for successful preservation. Figs would be laid out on flat surfaces, often on rooftops or specially constructed drying platforms, and turned regularly to ensure even drying. The process could take several weeks, depending on weather conditions and the size of the figs. Families had to protect the drying figs from insects, birds, and sudden rain showers that could ruin weeks of work. Once properly dried, the figs would be processed into paste using stone mortars and pestles. The dried figs would be pounded and ground until they formed a thick, sticky paste that could be shaped into cakes or stored in sealed containers. Sometimes nuts or seeds would be added to the paste, providing additional protein and healthy fats. The resulting fig paste was incredibly energy dense, providing quick fuel for people doing demanding physical labour. The natural sugars in figs were easily absorbed by the body, providing almost instant energy, while the fibre content helped slow absorption and prevent energy crashes. For people working long days in fields or workshops, fig paste was like having a portable energy bar that could provide sustained fuel for hours. What made fig paste particularly valuable was its keeping qualities. Properly prepared and stored fig paste could remain edible for months, providing a reliable source of concentrated nutrition during winter months when fresh foods were unavailable. The high sugar content acted as a natural preservative, preventing spoilage and maintaining nutritional value. The cultural significance of figs in ancient Greece extended beyond mere nutrition. Figs were associated with fertility, abundance, and divine blessing. According to mythology, the fig tree was sacred to Dionysus, the god of wine and celebration. For peasant families, having access to figs represented a connection to abundance and prosperity, even if temporary. Archaeological evidence shows that fig cultivation was widespread throughout the ancient Greek world, with specialized tools and facilities for processing and storing dried figs. The sophistication of fig processing techniques indicates that this wasn't just casual food preparation, but an important part of household food security planning. The seasonal nature of fig production created interesting patterns in ancient Greek nutrition. Fresh figs were available for only a short period in late summer, but the intensive processing during this time created a supply of concentrated nutrition that could last through winter and into spring. This seasonal abundance, followed by preservation, was crucial for surviving the annual cycle of plenty and scarcity. The communal aspects of fig processing were significant for social bonding and knowledge transfer. The labour-intensive process of drying and processing figs often involved multiple family members, and sometimes entire communities working together. Children would learn by watching and gradually taking on more responsibility, ensuring that knowledge about fig processing was passed down through generations. Modern health food stores sell fig-based energy bars and snacks for premium prices, marketing them as natural, healthy alternatives to processed foods. Ancient Greeks were getting the same nutritional benefits from fig paste while simply trying to preserve seasonal abundance for times of scarcity. The irony is that desperate preservation techniques created foods that modern nutritionists recommend as optimal human nutrition. The medicinal properties of figs were also recognized by ancient Greeks, who used them to treat digestive problems and as a general health tonic. Modern research has confirmed many of these traditional uses, showing that figs contain compounds that support digestive health, provide antioxidants, and contribute to overall wellness. From the sweet energy of fig paste, we venture into territory that would make modern diners squeamish, but was perfectly normal for ancient Greek peasants: snail and herb broth. The original protein foraging that turned garden pests into life-sustaining nutrition. Snails were the ultimate free-range protein source, requiring no investment in feed, housing or care, and available to anyone willing to collect them after rainstorms. For modern people accustomed to shrink-wrapped meat from grocery stores, the idea of gathering snails for dinner might seem primitive or disgusting, but for ancient Greek peasants, snails represented accessible protein that could mean the difference between malnutrition and health. The collection of snails required knowledge of timing and technique. The best time for snail gathering was after rain, when the creatures would emerge from their hiding places to feed and move around. Families would venture out with baskets and simple tools, searching under rocks, in vegetation, and along stone walls where snails congregated. This wasn't casual gathering, it was systematic protein harvesting that required understanding of snail behavior and habitat preferences. Once collected, snails required careful preparation to make them safe and palatable. They would be purged by feeding them clean herbs or grain for several days, allowing them to eliminate any potentially harmful substances they might have consumed. This purging process was crucial for food safety and also improved the flavour of the final dish. The preparation of snail broth was a slow, careful process that maximized the nutritional value of these small protein sources. The snails would be boiled to remove them from their shells, then added to pots with water and whatever herbs were available. Wild thyme, oregano, and other Mediterranean herbs would be added both for flavour and for their antimicrobial properties. The resulting broth was rich in protein and minerals, providing essential nutrients that were often lacking in plant-based diets. Snails are particularly high in iron, which was crucial for people doing heavy physical labour and at risk for anemia. The broth also provided B vitamins and other nutrients that supported overall health and energy levels. What made snail gathering particularly appealing was its accessibility. Unlike hunting larger game, which required special skills and equipment, snail collection could be done by anyone, including children and elderly family members. This democratic protein source meant that even the poorest families could supplement their diets with high-quality nutrition. The cultural attitudes towards snail consumption in ancient Greece were complex. While snails were recognized as nutritious and acceptable food, they were also associated with poverty and humble circumstances. Wealthy Greeks might eat snails as a delicacy, but for peasants they were necessity food that provided crucial protein during times when other sources were unavailable or unaffordable. Archaeological evidence shows that snail consumption was widespread throughout the ancient Mediterranean, with shell deposits found at archaeological sites across the region. The quantity of snail shells found at some sites indicates that snails were a regular part of the diet, not just emergency food consumed during famines. The seasonal nature of snail gathering created interesting patterns in ancient Greek nutrition. Snails were most active and easiest to collect during wet seasons, typically in fall and spring. This timing meant that snail protein was available during transitional seasons when other food sources might be scarce or when families were transitioning between stored foods and fresh seasonal produce. The knowledge required for successful snail gathering and preparation was considerable. Collectors had to understand which species were safe to eat, how to properly purge and prepare them, and how to incorporate them into nutritious meals. This knowledge was passed down through generations, with experienced foragers teaching younger family members the skills necessary for successful protein gathering. Modern French cuisine has elevated snails to gourmet status, serving escargot as an expensive delicacy in upscale restaurants. The transformation from peasant survival food to haute cuisine illustrates how cultural attitudes toward food can change dramatically over time. What was once necessity food for the poor has become luxury food for the wealthy. The medicinal properties of snails were also recognized by ancient Greeks, who used them to treat various ailments including respiratory problems and digestive issues. Modern research has shown that snails do contain compounds that have anti-inflammatory and other therapeutic properties, validating some of the traditional medicinal uses. From the protein-rich world of snail gathering, we move to our penultimate survival food, fermented grain drink, the original alcoholic nutrition that provided calories, safe hydration, and accidental probiotics in one ingenious beverage. In a world where water safety was questionable and calories were precious, fermented grain drinks served multiple crucial functions. They provided safe hydration, additional calories, and beneficial bacteria that supported digestive health. This wasn't recreational drinking, it was nutritional fermentation that made the most of limited grain supplies, while creating beverages that were safer than water and more nutritious than plain grain preparations. The fermentation process was based on knowledge accumulated over generations of accidental discoveries and careful observation. Grain that had been cooked and left standing would naturally begin to ferment due to wild yeasts present in the environment. Rather than discarding this spoiled food, ancient Greeks discovered that the fermentation process created beverages that were not only safe to drink, but actually beneficial for health. The preparation of fermented grain drinks required understanding of timing, temperature, and ingredient ratios. Barley, wheat, or other grains would be cooked into a thick porridge, then allowed to cool to the proper temperature for fermentation. Wild yeasts would begin the fermentation process naturally, but families learned to control the process by managing temperature and adding small amounts of previously fermented grain to speed up the process. The fermentation would continue for several days, creating a mildly alcoholic beverage that was rich in B vitamins and beneficial bacteria. The alcohol content was typically low, usually less than 5%, but sufficient to kill harmful bacteria and make the drink safer than untreated water. The resulting beverage had a slightly sour, yeasty flavour that was refreshing and satisfying. What made fermented grain drinks particularly valuable was their nutritional density. The fermentation process broke down complex carbohydrates into simpler sugars that were easier to digest, while also creating vitamins that weren't present in the original grain. The beneficial bacteria produced during fermentation supported digestive health and may have helped prevent intestinal diseases that were common in ancient times. The seasonal nature of grain fermentation was tied to agricultural cycles and grain availability. Fermented drinks were most commonly prepared during and after harvest time, when grain was most abundant and families could afford to use some of their stores for beverage production. The drinks provided additional nutrition during the busy harvest season when people needed maximum energy for intensive agricultural work. The cultural significance of fermented grain drinks in ancient Greece was considerable. These beverages were often consumed communally, creating opportunities for social bonding and celebration. While the wealthy might drink wine, fermented grain drinks were the democratic alcohol that was accessible to everyone regardless of economic status. Archaeological evidence shows that fermentation was practiced throughout the ancient world, with specialized vessels and tools found at sites across different cultures. The sophistication of fermentation equipment indicates that this wasn't just accidental food spoilage, but deliberate food processing that was understood and valued by ancient peoples. The knowledge required for successful fermentation was considerable, and required understanding of microbiology that wouldn't be scientifically explained for thousands of years. Fermenters had to understand how to create conditions that favored beneficial bacteria and yeasts while preventing harmful microorganisms from taking over. This knowledge was developed through trial and and error over generations. Modern craft brewing and fermentation movements are trying to rediscover techniques that ancient peoples used out of necessity. Contemporary brewers pay premium prices for wild yeasts and traditional fermentation methods, while ancient Greeks were achieving the same results using naturally occurring microorganisms and simple equipment. The health benefits of fermented grain drinks were significant, though not scientifically understood at the time. The fermentation process created probiotics that supported digestive health, B vitamins that were essential for energy metabolism, and alcohol that provided calories and acted as a mild antiseptic. For people eating limited diets, these beverages provided crucial nutritional supplements. The storage and preservation of fermented grain drinks required understanding of proper containers and storage conditions. The drinks had to be kept in appropriate vessels that allowed for continued fermentation while preventing contamination. Families developed techniques for maintaining fermentation cultures and creating consistent products despite variable conditions. Finally, we arrive at the ultimate expression of ancient Greek peasant resourcefulness. Whatever was left soup, the culinary philosophy that transformed scraps, bones, vegetable peels, and mystery ingredients into life-sustaining meals. This wasn't a recipe, it was a survival strategy, a way of thinking about food that ensured nothing edible was ever wasted. In a world where the difference between eating and starving could come down to a handful of vegetable scraps or a bone with a few shreds of meat still clinging to it, whatever was left soup represented the ultimate expression of culinary creativity born from desperate necessity. The preparation began with the largest pot the family owned, usually a clay vessel that had been passed down through generations and repaired multiple times. Into this pot would go everything that had any nutritional value. Bones from previous meals that still had marrow or scraps of meat, vegetable peels and stems that modern people would throw in the compost, stale bread that was too hard to eat, and any other food remnants that had accumulated over the past few days. The cooking process was an all-day affair that required constant attention and careful fire management. The pot would simmer slowly, allowing tough fibres to break down and flavours to meld together. Bones would release their marrow and any remaining nutrients, creating a rich broth that provided protein and minerals. Vegetable scraps would contribute vitamins and fibre, while stale bread would dissolve into the liquid, adding carbohydrates and helping to thicken the soup. What made whatever was left soup particularly ingenious was how it maximised the nutritional value of ingredients that would otherwise provide little nourishment. Bones that had been picked clean at previous meals still contained marrow, collagen, and minerals that could be extracted through long, slow cooking. Vegetable peels and stems often contained higher concentrations of vitamins and minerals than the parts that were typically eaten. The flavour of whatever was left soup was unpredictable and constantly changing, depending on what ingredients were available and how long they had been cooking. Sometimes the soup would be rich and satisfying, particularly if it contained bones with substantial marrow. Other times it would be thin and barely flavoured, providing hydration and minimal nutrition, but still representing precious calories that could mean the difference between hunger and satisfaction. The cultural significance of whatever was left soup extended beyond mere nutrition. The preparation and sharing of this soup represented family cooperation and resourcefulness in the face of hardship. Everyone contributed whatever scraps they could find, and everyone shared in the resulting meal, regardless of how humble it might be. The seasonal nature of whatever was left soup meant that its composition changed dramatically throughout the year. In late summer and fall, when fresh vegetables were abundant, the soup might contain substantial amounts of nutritious plant matter. During winter, it might be primarily bones and stored grain products. In spring, it might include foraged greens and the first fresh vegetables of the growing season. The knowledge required to create nutritious whatever was left soup was considerable. Cooks had to understand which scraps were safe to use and which might be spoiled or harmful. They had to know how to combine different ingredients for maximum nutritional value and how to cook them properly to make them digestible and safe. Archaeological evidence of whatever was left soup is harder to find than evidence of more formal recipes, but the cooking pots and food scraps found at ancient sites tell the story of resourceful people making the most of limited resources. The wear patterns on ancient cooking vessels suggest that they were used for long, slow cooking processes that would be consistent with scrap-based soup preparation. Modern bone broth trends is trying to replicate some of the nutritional benefits that ancient peoples achieved through whatever was left soup preparation. Contemporary health enthusiasts pay premium prices for grass-fed bones and organic vegetables to create broths that ancient Greeks were making from literal scraps and waste products. The health benefits of whatever was left soup were significant, particularly for people eating limited diets. The long cooking process extracted maximum nutrition from minimal ingredients, while the variety of scraps ensured dietary diversity that might not be available through other means. The collagen extracted from bones supported joint health, while the minerals provided essential nutrients that were often lacking in grain-based diets. The social aspects of whatever was left soup preparation and consumption were crucial for family bonding and resource sharing. The preparation required cooperation from all family members who would contribute scraps and help with the cooking process. The sharing of the finished soup reinforced family bonds and ensured that everyone received some nutrition, regardless of their individual contributions. And here we are, at the end of our journey through the surprisingly sophisticated world of ancient Greek peasant cuisine. What started as exploration of desperation food has revealed something remarkable. People who had never heard of superfoods, antioxidants, or optimal nutrition were eating better than most of us do today. Think about it. While we're spending $12 on acai bowls and $8 on kombucha, ancient Greek peasants were accidentally creating the Mediterranean diet that modern nutritionists worship. They were eating fermented foods before we understood gut health, combining plant proteins before we knew about amino acid profiles, and practicing zero-waste cooking before sustainability became trendy. They were getting probiotics from fermented grain drinks, complete proteins from lentil and barley combinations, healthy fats from olive oil, and dozens of different vitamins and minerals from foraged wild greens. They were eating seasonally not because some wellness guru told them to, but because that's what was available. They were practicing intermittent fasting not because of biohacking trends, but because sometimes the food just ran out. The irony is almost too perfect. These people who lived in constant fear of starvation, who had to make meals from literal scraps and waste products, who ground their grains by hand and foraged for wild plants just to survive, they were probably healthier than most of us with our processed foods, our sedentary lifestyles, and our expensive supplements. They understood something we've forgotten, that food is medicine, that nothing should be wasted, that simplicity can be more nourishing than complexity, and that the most important ingredients in any meal are creativity, resourcefulness, and gratitude for whatever you have. So the next time you're complaining about the price of organic kale, or wondering whether your expensive superfood powder is worth it, remember the ancient Greek peasants who created one of the world's healthiest diets, using nothing but olive oil, ingenuity, and the absolute determination to survive. They didn't need Instagram to tell them what to eat. They just needed to not die. And somehow in that simple goal, they found something we're still trying to buy our way back to. The secret to eating well with very little. Maybe the real superfood was the resourcefulness we could learn along the way.